a lot louder than Callum is. Sorry? You want me to use the microphone? Is that better? Okay. Right. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I'm Paul Kavanagh, and this is Ginger, the not-so-wee Ginger Doug, who's decided to lie on the floor this evening. He'll probably be making his way around the room at some point this evening. If anybody wants a photograph with the dog, I brought some doggy chews which are on the table, so you can bribe him, because he was Ginger was a Glasgow Labour councillor in a previous incarnation, and he's highly susceptible to bribery. So if you want a photograph with him, get the photograph and then give him the chew, not the other way about, because then he'll just wander off. But yeah, I'm delighted to come this far north. This is the first time I've been to Orkney since 1983, I think it was, 1984. It was around about then. I came to Orkney for a few days with a friend who was here for a work thing, and I'm delighted to come back. But yeah, so thank you all very much for coming. I was a bit concerned with the general election, I'm sure a lot of you were, because, you know, I was expecting that the SNP was going to lose some seats. I was disappointed that they lost as many as they did. And I think it's really important now that the independence movement doesn't lose momentum. And I was very heartened by Nicola Sturgeon's speech earlier this week. And basically what she's done now is to decouple the case for the independence movement from the SNP. Basically, it's now over to us. It's up to us now as non-party political people, or even people who are in other different parties, people who belong to various parties or none, to get behind the case for independence, to rebuild a grassroots movement for independence. I think what was happening too much over the past year or so was that the case for independence was getting too closely tied up with the fortunes of a single political party. And now, irrespective of what party is in government, how that party does with, say, education, or how that party manages the Scottish Health Service, fundamentally those questions have got absolutely nothing to do with the broader issue of Scottish independence. And unfortunately, what had happened over the past year or so was that the case for independence was being too closely tied up in the public eye with how the SNP was performing as the Scottish Government. Now, Scotland, when it becomes independent, and it's not if, it's when, Scotland will be a democracy. Other political parties will be available. We will not be a one-party state. God forbid we might even have Ruth Davidson as First Minister. Though I hope not, because I'll emigrate if that happens. I'll be honest, I do have a personal animus with Ruth Davidson. I came out as gay in the 1980s when it was quite dangerous to do so. I got beaten up twice, I got gay bashed twice. I was estranged from various family members for many years because of it. You know, back then it was a dangerous and radical thing to do, to assert that, you know, LGBTQ people were the equal of anybody else. We were fighting for equality, we were fighting for justice. And Ruth Davidson seems to think that the whole point of the campaign for lesbian and gay equality was, please don't be nasty to gay people so that we can be Daily Mail readers as well. So I really do have a few issues with Ruth about that. But like I said, I'm really pleased that, you know, that so many people have come out tonight. We've got a big job to do. We have to re-energise the grassroots independence movement. The unionists haven't stopped. They're still fundraising, they're still campaigning, they're still doing exactly what they were doing. Scotland and Union are still active, they're still getting large donations from big businessmen. They're still getting their declarations of support from various B-list celebrities, like Neil Oliver, for example, the archaeologist guy from the BBC, who doesn't want independence because he hates nationalism, as long as it's not, say, British nationalism, which doesn't count as nationalism at all, and anyway he lives in New Zealand. And then, of course, there's Dan Snow, who doesn't want independence because his family own a holiday property the size of West Lothian in the Highlands. And then there's Ben Fogle, who doesn't want independence because he thinks he's a mountain in Argyll. So as many reasons for opposing Scottish independence as there are reasons for supporting it. And that's what we need to do with the grassroots independence movement. We need to show that there's a broad case for Scottish independence. Now, the problem that we had, I felt, over the past year was that we were getting bogged down in process. We were talking constantly about getting a referendum. Now, I personally don't want another referendum until I know that Scotland's independence movement is going to win it. That's when I want an independence referendum. And I think now what we have a chance to do is to focus on the case for independence rather than this constant talk of getting an independence referendum. If we can build the case for independence, if we can create a huge grassroots movement in favour of independence, articulating the case for Scottish independence, then there won't be any arguments about Scotland having an independence referendum, because it will be a formality. Because Scotland will have an independence referendum, not because most people in the country want an independence referendum, but because most people in the country want independence. And that's when we should have an independence referendum, when we know we're going to win it. And the way that we can do that is by building a grassroots movement that has representation right across Scotland, everywhere in this country. And I've been talking to lots of local groups all over the country in the past few months. As Callum was saying, you know, I've been taking part in the National Roadshow. We've been to exotic places like Paisley and Cumbernauld. But I've also been doing talks to Yes groups and to Commonweal groups, to SNP groups, the length and breadth of Scotland. I've been to Skye, I've been to Forres, I've been to Inverness, I've been to Campbelltown, I've been down in the Borders a few times as well, and I'm constantly finding there's a great response from people everywhere. Actually, one of the best, when we do the question and answer thing at the end, and it was up in Forres, and a guy said, when I was asking, you know, if anybody's got any questions, and he says, no, he says, I've got a question, it's just a statement. He says, you know, when Scotland gets independence, we'll have our own stamps. And I'm like, okay. And he says, see that Doug? See that Doug? That Doug will be on a stamp. And I really, really like that idea, because that means that when Scotland's an independent Scotland is an independent country, Ruth Davidson is going to have to lick my dog's behind. And personally, I'd vote for independence for that and for nothing else. But we all have our own individual reasons about why we want Scottish independence. I mean, my own case, my own belief in independence comes from wanting Scottish nuclear disarmament. I'm really in favour of that. I always have been, ever since I was young. When I was very young, when I was about 18, 19, the peace camp at Fastlane opened. I lived in Easterhouse in the East End of Glasgow at the time. And myself and some friends decided that we were going to go and show our solidarity with the cause of Scottish nuclear disarmament and camp, go to the peace camp at Fastlane. But being teenage boys for Easterhouse, of course, what we decided we were going to do was to get a big kerry out, and we got our bottles of Buckfast, and we borrowed pots and pans. I borrowed my mummy's best frying pan, and we decided we would camp by Loch Lomond, and then go to the peace camp the next day. Which we did actually manage, severely hungover. So we went to camp by the side of Loch Lomond, and we were just wild camping, which is really you shouldn't do. But at the time, this was back in the 80s, and people weren't really aware of that. We certainly weren't aware of it. We were far too drunk to be aware of it. And we got completely rat-arsed by the side of Loch Lomond, and we all passed out. And then the next morning we woke up, and all the pots and pans that we'd used for the fry-up the night before had all vanished. And I'm thinking, we've been robbed. Somebody's robbed us when we've passed out. And then I'm thinking, but who's going to steal dirty pots and pans? What kind of nutcase steals pots and pans but leaves your wallet? And then my pal Mikey says, no, don't worry, I've got it all sorted, I've got it sussed. He says, I seen this magic thing in a movie once. He says, it saves you the bother of having to do the washing up. You just fling everything in the water and you wait for the tide to go out and it's all clean. And we're like, Mikey, it's a fucking loch. And my mammy's best frying pan is still somewhere at the bottom of Loch Lomond. And we still have nuclear weapons on the Clyde. So Actually, she only found that out about, not about the nuclear weapons, she's known about that, but the frying pan, when I told her, when I says I was starting to do these talks, and I said, she says, well, what are you going to talk about? And I says one of the stories I was going to tell was about the Loch Lomond thing, and that's when she realised what had happened to her frying pan. And ever since, she's been saying, you owe me a frying pan, you owe me a frying pan. So one of the reasons I have to persuade people to buy my books is because I've got to buy my mother a frying pan. So, but like I said, I was very strongly motivated to get rid of the obscenity of nuclear weapons from the Clyde. I get really angry with politicians like, for example, Jackie Baillie, who claim that, they talk about Trident as though it was a job creation scheme. It's not a job creation scheme, it's a weapon of mass destruction. It's a weapon of mass destruction which isn't even the independent deterrent that they claim that it is. Because they can't launch it without the permission of the Americans. It's the Americans that are in charge of the targeting mechanisms for it. It's basically Britain is paying billions and billions and billions of pounds in order to take part ownership, to take responsibility for a part of America's nuclear deterrent. That's what we're doing it for. And the only reason it exists is a form of Viagra for an impotent post-empire. It's so that British politicians can claim that they're still a global power, that they can have a seat on the UN Security Council, and they can strut on the world stage as though they're still an important country and not a not very important European power, which is what the United Kingdom really is. And basically, we have that on the Clyde because of the pretensions of the British establishment. And it's justified by people like Jackie Baillie and other politicians who claim that it's, in effect, a job creation scheme, as if the entire point of Trident is to keep open a medium-sized Tesco Express in the Greater Helensburgh area. That isn't the point of Trident. The point of Trident is to kill millions and millions and millions of people. And it makes us a target. It's a nonsense that we have that. We have that in the Clyde. And it's 30 years on. People are still campaigning against it. And the only way we're going to get rid of it is in an independent Scotland. And for me, that's one of the greatest motivations for Scottish independence, is it gives us the opportunity to get rid of that obscenity from the Clyde. And also to get away from the pretensions of the British establishment and their fixation on all things military. I mean, I had to laugh during the first independence referendum. I love saying the first independence referendum, by the way, because it implies that there'll be a second independence referendum. Actually, the second independence referendum will be the last Scottish independence referendum, because we won't need another one after that. We're going to win it. But a lot of the British politicians, their talk of why Scotland should remain a part of the United Kingdom, it's not for the benefit of Scotland, it's for the benefit of the British establishment. We're a convenient place to park their missiles. We're a convenient recruiting ground for cannon fodder. That's why they want us. And we're disposable. That's why they have Trident on the Clyde and they don't have it in the Thames. Because if it was as safe as they said it was, they could park it down the road from Westminster. But they don't. They've parked it down the road from the biggest conurbation in Scotland. I don't want it there. I don't want it in Scotland. I don't want it anywhere. But all we can take responsibility for is what's in our own country, and we can get rid of it from Scotland. And that's one of the reasons why I want Scottish independence. But like I said, I do have to laugh at the pretensions of various politicians that talk about Scotland and how we're supposed to benefit from British defence. This is the British defence that had to send a boat from Plymouth, I think it was, Plymouth or Portsmouth, because there was a Russian submarine in the Moray Firth, and it took 2 days to get there. That's the defence that they offer us. Meanwhile, Philip Hammond, who was the Minister of Defence during the independence referendum, he's now the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he came to Scotland during the independence referendum debate and told us that Scotland needed to remain a part of the United Kingdom because if we became independent, we would have no defence from threats from outer space, he said. Because very obviously, an alien civilization that possesses the advanced technology that allows it to navigate the vast gulfs of interstellar space is going to be deterred by a Royal Navy submarine that can't successfully negotiate an orbit of the Isle of Skye. And that's the kind of nonsense that they feed us, you know, and that this is reported seriously in newspapers, when it is risible, it's laughable, but that's what they tell us, you know. And Scotland isn't just an adjunct to the pretensions of the British establishment. Scotland's a country which needs to look after itself. Scotland's a country which has got problems. Scotland's a country that's got issues. Like I said, we all have our own reasons for wanting Scottish independence. You know, I don't want Scottish independence because I think Scotland is so wonderful, that Scotland is so great, that Scotland's the best country in the world and it's such a fantastic place. I want Scottish independence because there's so many things wrong with Scotland. Scotland has problems. Scotland has issues. We have issues of poverty. We have issues of deprivation. We have massive issues of unfair land ownership. Like the Dan Snow I was talking about earlier, his late father-in-law has a Highland estate which is bigger than West Lothian. One single family owns a Highland estate which is the same size as a county in Scotland. Now that can't be allowed. There's one of the other second biggest landowners in Scotland is a Danish billionaire who isn't allowed to own large amounts of land in Denmark, because if you own land in Denmark, you have to actually have an agricultural background and a plan to develop the land that you've got. So he's invested in Scotland instead. And he owns large chunks of Scotland, which are depopulated of people. The great beauty of the Scottish Highlands that we see is an artificial man-made environment, because everywhere you go, you see ruined and empty villages. When Scotland became a part of the United Kingdom in 1707, half of the Scottish population lived in the Highlands. It's now a small minority of the population. And that's a huge issue in Scotland. We have a massively imbalanced population distribution. And we can't tackle those issues because the establishment which is in charge has a vested interest in keeping things the way they are at the moment. And like I says, the only way that we can change things is to take the power into our own hands and change it for ourselves. I actually became converted properly to the cause of Scottish independence when I was a teenager, after the incident with the frying pan. I became politicised because I came out as gay, and I got, actually the only time I ever joined a political party was I became a member of the Socialist Workers' Party at Glasgow University, and I was a member for 6 weeks. The only reason I joined was because I fancied their lesbian and gay organiser, and I dismally failed to get off with them. And I kind of lost interest in politics after that, funnily enough. And then they threw me out. I got a letter from them. And now, I hadn't made any secret of the fact that I wanted a Scottish Republic. And they sent me this letter saying that I was being expelled from the party because of bourgeois nationalism. It was actually for calling their West of Scotland organiser a middle-class wanker up to start the revolution in Newton Mearns. That's why they threw me out. And I've always kind of shied away from party politics after that. But I've had this constant belief in Scottish independence. And it came about because I went to the Netherlands when I was, after my first year at university. I studied linguistics at university. And I got a Eurorail pass to go to Finland to teach English for the summer. And I should apologise now, because if you go to Finland and someone says to you in a Scottish accent, a Glasgow accent, "Fuck off, you muppet," that was me that taught them how to say that. That was my contribution to the spreading of the English language in Finland. But I was in the Netherlands first, and it was the first time I'd ever been outside the British Isles. I'd been to Ireland when I was a kid. I'd obviously been to England. I'd been to Scotland. It was the first time I'd ever actually been outside the United Kingdom, outside the British Isles, I should say. And I was in this park in Rotterdam, and because it was the Netherlands, because I was a teenage boy from the East End, I was stoned out of a tree, because that's what you do in 1981 when you go to the Netherlands. And I was sitting in this park in the Netherlands, stoned out my face with this Dutch guy that I'd met in this bar, and we were sitting just chatting away, and sitting in this lovely park in this sunny day in May in Rotterdam. And I'm thinking to myself, God, this is lovely. This is just really, really nice here, you know. And we're sitting on this lovely manicured lawn in this park. and there's all these well-fed and well-dressed people walking by, and the houses are all well-maintained and well looked after. There wasn't any... I mean, in the East End of Glasgow, you have shops that look like bomb shelters. You know, they're all boarded up. There's all these iron bars everywhere. And there was none of that. It was all very nice and douce and, lovely. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm all mellow and at one with the universe. And I'm thinking, this is just really, really nice. This is lovely here. And then the Dutch guy got up to go away. I was due to go and get a train so that I could continue my journey on to Finland. And the Dutch guy got up to go away, and just as he was leaving, he said to me, you need to be careful because this is a really bad area. and that's when it struck me that Parkhead's not normal. And that was my sort of light bulb moment about why I wanted Scottish independence. Because it made me think, and I got quite angry actually, because I was thinking, I'd always thought Parkhead and Shettleston and the deprivation and social inequality and poverty that you see in places like that, I'd always thought that was normal. That was normal. And yet we were constantly being told that the United Kingdom was one of the richest, the most advanced, the most developed countries in the world, and that Scotland needed this country to look after it. And yet people in Scotland, like me, were being brought up, and we thought that this kind of poverty and deprivation and social exclusion was normal. And it was only when I went to another country that I realised it's not normal. There are better ways of doing this. And that's what made me realise, that something my mother always used to say when we were kids, if you want something done, you need to do it yourself. And that kind of rang in my head. And that's why I want Scottish independence. Because if we want something done, and we want to do something about the problems that Scotland's got, about the inequality, about the social injustice, about Trident, about land ownership, about making sure that this is a country that's fit for its citizens, that every citizen in this country, every person who lives in Scotland is capable of having a dignified life. We need to do that for ourselves, because the Westminster political parties aren't going to do it for us. And that, for me, was my light bulb moment. That was, for me, I decided that this is what we need. That's why we need Scottish independence. It's not about Scotland being great. It's not about the past. It's not about some mystic, rosy picture of Braveheart running about in a hill, about, big hairy men with beards running about hills with blue-painted faces pretending that they're Pictish warriors. Scottish independence is about the future. It's not about the past. That's what Scottish independence is all about. It's not about where you come from, it's about where we're going. And I want Scotland to have a destination. I want Scotland to have a hopeful destination. And the only way we can do that is with independence. Now, like I said, I was born and I was brought up in the East End of Glasgow, where people are born cynical, and we get more cynical the older we get. The East End of Glasgow, Glasgow East, typically has the lowest turnout for elections in the whole of the United Kingdom. Typically, it's around about 50% of the population actually bother to turn out to vote, because people are cynical and disengaged, because they know, they've learned from bitter experience, that it doesn't matter what you vote for, it doesn't matter what you say, nobody pays any attention to what goes on in this area, and everything stays the same. And people self-medicate on alcohol, they self-medicate on drugs, and they descend into this spiral of hopelessness and despair. And that's considered normal for parts of the East End of Glasgow, for parts of Edinburgh, for lots of places across this country. That's the normality that we live with. And it's not normal, and we have to do something about it. So I think the dog's quite enjoying himself. But like I said, Scottish independence isn't about the past, it's about the future, it's about what we can do and about what we can achieve. Now, I came back to Scotland after living away for many, many years. I moved down to London in around about 1990. I moved down to London when I met the man who became a partner, Andy. And then we moved to Spain. I lived in Spain for 15 years. We came back to Scotland early in 2013. By then, sadly, Andy had been diagnosed with vascular dementia. And I knew I was going to need support in order to look after him, which was a lot to do with why we came back. But we came back when the independence referendum was starting to get into full swing. And what I noticed then, the first time I'd ever seen it in my life, that I saw ordinary working class people in the East End of Glasgow were enthused, they were engaged, they were hopeful about the future. And I had never, ever seen that before. I had never seen that people had realised that it was up to them, that they could take their destiny into their own hand, that they could hope. And that, for me, was the great lesson of the independence referendum of 2014. Scotland learned how to hope. And once you learn how to hope, you can't ever unlearn it. You know, they say that despair and depression are finite, but hope is infinite. And I sincerely believe that hope is infinite. And it's by clinging on to hope, by making hope a reality. That's what Scottish independence is all about. And that's what we need to do. We need to articulate that message of hope to people, to show people that how we can actually achieve these things, that we can actually achieve a better Scotland than the one that we've got. And that's why we are campaigning for this. It's not because we're patriotic bravehearts. It's because we are concerned citizens who want to make a better country and who know that democracy is a participatory process or it dies. If you aren't involved in democracy, there is no democracy. You live in a situation of patronage. And that's what we've had in Scotland for far too long. We've had patronage. We've not had involvement in politics. And that's why the unionist parties are so afraid of the independence movement, because it's people taking control of their own affairs, people taking charge, people getting involved in politics. We're not leaving it to the people in the professional politicians. We're taking power away from them and we're putting it into the hands of the people. And they really don't like that. And that's why the whole myth of the evil cybernet was created. It was a deliberate tactic of the unionist campaign in order to disengage people from politics, in order to stop people from participating in what was a glorious movement of mass political engagement and participation. Now, people say that, but the referendum was so divisive, it was so terrible. Basically, what they mean by that is that they could no longer mouth off in the golf club about how crap Scotland was without someone answering them back. That's what they meant. That was the divisiveness. It was that they no longer had the field all to themselves. The best possibly way to illustrate that is with the media in this country. Now, we do have the National now, which I'm very grateful for. We also have, we had the Sunday Herald during the independence referendum campaign, but that was it. During the independence referendum, we had the Sunday Herald was the only newspaper in the country that supported Scottish independence. Now, irrespective of what your views are on a particular topic, if you live in a democracy which has a representative media, then the media should broadly reflect the range of views that are found in that society. Now, half the population of Scotland at the moment are supportive of the idea of independence, but we can't say that about the media in this country by a long chalk, even though we've got the National now. You cannot say that by any stretch of the imagination that half the media outlets in this country support Scottish independence. So we don't. So we were really fighting in the teeth of the concerted opposition of the entire unionist establishment in order to get the message of independence out there. And we did that with a grassroots movement. And we didn't just do it with a grassroots movement. We did it with style. We did it with humour. We did it with panache. And we did it entirely peacefully. Now, we're very, very good in Scotland. If there was an Olympic category for beating yourself up, Scotland would probably win the gold medal every time because we've got the best inferiority complex in this country. But we're not very good at giving ourselves credit where credit is due. Now, normally, in most countries, when they have a debate about independence, when one part of a country wants to secede and become, one part of a state, I should say, wants to secede and become a different state, that's a discussion that's conducted with bullets and bombs and bloodshed and violence and states of emergency and disappearances and internment camps and bodies being found in the street. That's how, historically, independence is debated in most countries. The only casualty of the Scottish independence movement was Jim Murphy's shirt. And that is a testament to the enormous maturity of the Scottish population. Now, certainly we've got our nutcases in Scotland, I'm not denying that. We've got sectarian nut jobs, we've got people who believe that because they support a particular football team that they have to vote in a particular way. But they're very much a minority. Unfortunately, one of them is my dad, who's your archetypal West of Scotland Catholic, I'm afraid. My dad, he's 80, he's not going to change, and he voted no in the referendum. He's been a Labour supporter all his life, and he voted no, and I asked him why he voted no, and he said, because I don't want to be ruled by Presbyterians, he said. And then just after the election there, and Theresa May announces that she's doing a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party, the successors to Ian Paisley, to form a government, and I did say to him, so how's that not being ruled by Presbyterians working out for you? And my mum was like, stop it, just stop it, Paul, just stop it, just stop it. So I was being a bit divisive there, you know. But the fact remains that in Scotland we do have an immense respect for democracy. And I mean, I used to live in Spain, like I said, for a long time, and I follow the Catalan independence debate very, very closely. I'm fluent in Spanish. I used to actually work as a Spanish interpreter and translator, and my Catalan's reasonably good. I don't speak it particularly well, but I understand it. I can read Catalan newspapers, I can follow Catalan news broadcasts on the television or the radio, and I'm very interested in what's going on in Catalonia. And they hold up the Scottish debate as an example for everyone else to follow. This is an example of how these kind of debates should be held, because they do have a history of violence, not so much in Catalonia, but certainly in the Basque Country with ETA. There is a history of violence around debates about independence movements. And they held up the Scottish debate as an example, a shining example, of how this debate should be held. This is what democracy looks like. Whereas in Scotland, of course, we kind of look to Catalonia and think, well, why can't we be like that, you know, when they have 1 million people that are coming out on the streets to demonstrate their support, and we think we're doing really well if we've got 25,000 people coming to a rally in Glasgow. I mean, obviously there's differences between the two campaigns. To be honest, I would rather have the Scottish one than the Catalan one for various reasons. There are reasons why the Catalans are able to get millions of people out on the street, and one of them is to do with the fact that they have a media. They have a representative Catalan media. Now, in Scotland, we don't have a national broadcaster of our own, which is outrageous. And we are reduced to making the case for arguing for an extra 30 minutes of BBC News. You know, the argument about the Scottish Six, which was described in a unionist newspaper by David Torrance, the Conservative supporting commentator, David Torrance, described the campaign for a Scottish Six for an extra 30 minutes of news from BBC Scotland as the holy grail of the Scottish nationalist movement. And I had to laugh when I read that, because I thought that the holy grail of the Scottish independence movement was independence and not an extra half hour of Jackie Bird. But in Catalonia, they have 5 TV channels of their own. You know, we're trying to argue about getting, you know, 1. We don't have 1. In Catalonia, they've got 5. We were arguing about, you know, getting an extra 30 minutes of news broadcast from Scotland. In Catalonia, they have their own 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news channel. They've got a Catalan news channel. Why can't we have a Scottish news channel? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, broadcasting reports, news and opinion from a Scottish perspective about the whole world. Because we can do that. But you actually find journalists in this country, unionist supporting journalists, arguing that we don't need any more Scottish journalism. I mean, that's nonsensical when you think about it, but that's in effect what they're doing. But that's one of the reasons why Catalonia is able to get mass support out in the streets. Obviously, of course, they can get mass support out in the streets because they've got far better weather than we have. You know, they don't need to worry about the rain as much as we do. But also they have more of a tradition of outdoor events than we have in Scotland, again, partly to do with the weather. But the most important reason is because they have an independent media. They have a media of their own. And it doesn't matter whether you support independence or you're opposed to independence. If there's going to be a national event that that's going to take place. And it is broadcast in advance that these events are going to take place. So people know about them. And then they can make the decision for themselves about whether they want to go or not. When we have similar events in Scotland, like the rally that was in Glasgow recently, or the ones, the various other independence events that we've had, the only way we have of broadcasting them, of making people know about them, is through social media. And they are broadcast on the Scottish, BBC Scotland or STV News after the event, if at all. And then it's usually to say, oh, but not very many people turned up, So we don't have an independent media. That's the biggest difference between Scotland and Catalonia. However, the greatest difference is that we have an inalienable right to self-determination. Not even unionists dispute that in Scotland. No unionist could credibly claim that Scotland does not have the right to become independent if that is the will of the majority of the Scottish population. Now, that's the greatest single thing that we've got going in our favour, and something that they don't have in Catalonia. Because in Catalonia, they're kind of hamstrung by a clause in the Spanish constitution which says that Spain is one and indivisible. And that was a clause that was put into the democratic constitution of Spain after the death of the dictator Franco, in order to get the generals to go back into their barracks, because there was a lot of fear at the time that Spain was going to have another civil war. Now, the cause for the civil war in the 30s was the fear that Catalonia and the Basque Country were going to become independent. And an awful lot of people in the rest of Spain genuinely fear that if Catalonia becomes independent, Spanish democracy is at risk. And they genuinely worry about that. People in England do not worry that English democracy is at risk because Scotland becomes independent. Most of them aren't interested. I mean, to be honest, English democracy is at risk because we are in a country with an unwritten constitution, which effectively means that politicians can do what the hell they want. Theresa May called her disastrous general election a few weeks ago, despite the fact that there's a fixed-term Parliaments Act. There's no parliament can bind a future parliament as one of the provisions of the supposedly unwritten British constitution, which is basically just another way of saying that Westminster politicians can do what the hell they want. And then Theresa May decided that she was going to turn Brexit into a power grab for Westminster. Now, that's the reality of where we are at the moment. We've got a government in Westminster which is seeing Brexit as the opportunity to take lots of power for Westminster, but not just for Westminster, for the office of the Prime Minister. And that's why Theresa May called that election, because she wanted a large majority, and that would basically have turned her into an elective dictator. We are now in a situation in Scotland where we have a government that we didn't elect, that's in coalition or in governing because it's done a deal with another party which we can't vote for, in order to implement a Brexit policy that we voted against. And that is why Scotland needs, right now, the independence movement more than it ever did. So I would urge you now, if you are members of Yes Orkney, to start, we need to, of course, I'm sure you never stopped, but we have to redouble our efforts. We have to start to articulate a positive case, a compelling case for independence. Now, there's a lot of things I think was wrong with the first campaign that we can learn from and we can do better this time. I felt, being a kind of cynical East End person, I thought that the first campaign was a bit too happy-clappy, really. There was too many wish trees and not enough ball kicking for my taste. And I think that we need to be a lot more assertive, not to have a project fear of our own, but we have to be a lot more assertive about the negative aspects and the downsides of being a part of the United Kingdom than we were the first time around. And that's a lot easier to do now, because a lot of the arguments that that were put forward for the unionists the first time round, they have destroyed now. They told us, for example, that if we became independent, that lots of 20, I think it was 26, 13 to start off with. I can't remember the figure, but I think it was 26 to begin with. Sorry, it was Type 26. 13 frigates were going to be built on the Clyde, and then that number was reduced to 8. and then the funding that was going to be guaranteed for the shipyards in the Clyde, that was axed. They told us that we needed to vote against independence, otherwise we would lose jobs in the tax office in East Kilbride and Cumbernauld. So we voted against independence and we lost those jobs anyway. They told us that we needed to vote against independence in order to have the security and stability of the United Kingdom. Well, we don't even know what's happening in the United Kingdom next week, never mind next month. And we learned very much from the European Union referendum that these broad shoulders of the United Kingdom, they don't have a functioning brain on them. But I was very struck, actually, by all the way through the independence referendum, the constant refrain was, what's your plan B? What's your plan B? In reference to the currency. That really shouldn't be an issue. I mean, personally, I thought that was a big strategic mistake from the Yes campaign the first time round. We need to have an argument that's convincing on the currency, and personally, I think we should argue for a Scottish currency. I've always believed that. I thought it was a mistake to argue for a currency union. Now, I'm not an economist, but I'm told by people who are economists that that was the most sensible thing to do. It was the most sensible argument to make, because it would cause the least amount of disruption for both economies. But the problem with it was impossible to sell, because it effectively meant that we were having to go around the doorstep saying to people, yeah, we want independence from Westminster, and yeah, we need Westminster to cooperate with us on a key plank of our economic policy. And of course they were going to turn around and say no. I'd have said no as well if I was them. We were giving them a big open goal. But we also, one of the big advantages of saying that we're going to have an independent Scottish currency, and it's not such a hard thing to do. I mean, after all, countries like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania successfully set up their own currencies when they were coming out of the economic wreckage of the former Soviet Union. Scotland is not an ex-Soviet state. We are perfectly capable of setting up a currency of our own. It's not that hard. The Unionists are, of course, going to attack it anyway. They're going to attack whatever we do. But that's the best strategy for Scotland. And the reason it's the best strategy is because it means that we are not asking the Unionists to cooperate with us. What it means is that Westminster requires Scotland to cooperate with them after Scottish independence. Because not having a stake in the Bank of England, setting up our own currency, means that we can say, well, see all this deficit that we've got, a large chunk of this deficit that Scotland supposedly has is... Now, I've always been very suspicious of the GERS figures. I've always tended to the view that the GERS figures, the Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland is what it stands for. I've always tended to the view that GERS was called GERS was because, like the football team, it was a work of fiction for tax purposes. But according to the GERS statistics, Scotland has this deficit of £15 billion a year. But a large chunk of that, when you look at the figures, is to do with interest repayments on the UK's eye-watering national debt. But an awful large chunk of that is money that's repaid to the Bank of England because of quantitative easing. There is a magic money tree, people. It's a magic money tree if you happen to be a bank. There are magic money trees for rich people. There isn't magic money trees for poor people. But what happens with this quantitative easing money is the Bank of England then went and invented this money out of nowhere, out of thin air. They invented this money. They gave it to the British Treasury as a loan. They gave it to the banks. It's then interest is paid on that loan, which the UK Treasury pays to the Bank of England. And because the Bank of England is wholly owned by the UK Treasury, the Bank of England then pays that money back to the UK Treasury. And effectively what Unionists are saying is that after Scotland becomes independent, Scotland will be expected to repay money to the Bank of England, which it will then pay to the UK Treasury. But if we don't have a stake in the Bank of England because we are setting up our own currency, if we don't own the Bank of England, we can turn around quite lightly and say, we're having our own currency, see your national debt, you can stick it up your bum. And that's one of the reasons why I won't be negotiating Scottish independence. But the point is that we need a strategy that puts the onus on Westminster to seek cooperation with us and not the other way about. And that's what we can do with the currency. There's a whole lot of issues that we need to go through. And people who know far more about the topic than I do will certainly come up with a credible issue on a Scottish currency. But we can go through that with lots and lots of different issues and present a case to people. But the key thing about Scottish independence, and this is what's lost when it's too closely associated with one particular party, because one of the things that I had the biggest problem with during the independence referendum is that we were constantly being put on the back foot because we were having to argue about particular policies of the SNP. Now, I'm not criticising the particular policies, but the point is that Scottish independence does not depend on how well a particular party presents a particular case for a particular thing, because other options are available. Scottish independence doesn't depend on what, the SNP's idea is for corporation tax. Scottish independence doesn't depend on whether we're a republic or whether we're a monarchy. Scottish independence doesn't depend on whether we're a member of NATO or we're not a member of NATO. Scottish independence is about one thing, and it's about one thing only. It's about who is the sovereign body in Scotland, who gets to make these decisions. Should it be the Westminster Parliament, or should it be a sovereign Scottish people who elect a government that is responsible to them and answerable to them and to no one else? That's what independence is about. Now, I'm quite happy. I think, what we should talk about is that when we become independent, we keep as much as possible for the status quo. And then after we have independence, that's the time that we decide whether we want to be a republic or whether we want to be a monarchy. Personally, I'm all in favour of being a republic. I've always wanted a Scottish republic. I still want a Scottish republic. I respect the fact that there are people that would like Scotland to remain a monarchy, but that is an argument for us to have one Scotland as an independent state. And it's the Scottish people who should make that decision. And that's what independence is all about. It's about who gets to make the decision, not what this particular decision is. And that's a case that can only be articulated by a broad-based, non-party, all-party mass movement. And that's what we have to do over the next coming months and years, is to build that mass movement for an independent Scotland, so that there is an overwhelming clamour in this country, not just for an independence referendum, but for an independent Scotland. And that means that when we do have a second Scottish independence referendum, the last Scottish independence referendum, that it will be a foregone conclusion what the result's going to be, that we will win it, and we will win it handsomely. And Scotland will become an independent state, and there's nothing that the Westminster parties can do to stop us. So I'm conscious of the time here, so I'm going to stop now, and we're going to have a break for tea and coffee, and then we do some questions and answers. So how does that sound? Right. So thank you all for listening.